Last week, we looked at how David prayed when he got stabbed in the back. And I don't know about you, but I have never personally experienced just praying a prayer like David offered for us in Psalm 54 once and then had it go and all the burden lifted off of me and I felt fine and I never had to deal with it again. Typically doesn't work that way for me. It probably doesn't work that way for you either. It takes some time to work through this, doesn't it? I had a friend of mine that started a church, and shortly into the beginning of the church, there was a man, I'll call him Fred, that began attending the church, and he was a pastor that had retired from a different church and wanted to come alongside and help him. And he was quite a helper to my friend for a while. But slowly, Fred began to get ideas that he could run this church better and pastor this church more efficiently than my friend could. And so one week when my friend was gone on vacation, Fred made his move and really tried to just take the church away and make it his own church. My friend had to come back and deal with that. And sadly, the church ended up splitting because a bunch of the people went with Fred as he started another church. Years later, I would still hear my friend make a statement like this. He would see somebody in the church that was behaving in a certain way, and he'd say, you know what, that person looks like Fred. Or another phrase he'd say is, that person smells like Fred. Years after the fact, he was on guard for somebody like a Fred that was going to come along and stab him in the back, do the exact same thing that the original Fred had done to him. And, you know, I think that that's pretty common for all of us when we've been hurt. We have some cliches that we use quite frequently, don't we? Once bitten, twice shy. And then we say this, well, fool me once, shame on you for doing that to me, but fool me twice or stab me in the back twice. Where do we put that blame? Well, that's shame on me because I should have seen that coming. It already happened to me once. And so I should have been on guard to not let it happen again. So that's what happens. We begin to look around and see that threat everywhere that we look, And so I think that the way that the Psalms, the book of the Psalms was compiled and put together, I think that when somebody read this 55th Psalm, which also tells us at the beginning that it's written by David, but it doesn't give us any background. Psalm 54 told us that it was written by David and told us it was after these Ziphites had stabbed him in the back, after they had betrayed him. Psalm 55 doesn't say anything like that. It just simply says a Psalm of David. But whoever compiled all these Psalms together, as they're looking at Psalm 55, I think what they're saying is, you know, it sounds like David is still dealing with this. Like he's still saying, those guys smell like Ziphites. Those guys are acting like Ziphites. In fact, he says in verse number 12 of Psalm 55, David says, if an enemy were insulting me, I could endure it. If a foe were raising himself against me, I could hide from him. But it is you, a man like myself, my companion, my close friend. So he's not saying that there actually is an enemy there. He's even looking at people that were friends and saying, are you a Ziphite? Are you acting like a Ziphite? Do you smell like Fred? Do you act like Fred? Because I'm going to be on guard. I'm going to keep my armor on, and I'm going to make sure that I don't get stabbed in the back again. And so it's very instructive that this 55th Psalm shows up the way that it's arranged right after this. You see, inside of our brain, our brains cannot tell the difference between a real threat and a perceived threat. Our brain doesn't have eyes to see or ears to hear or fingers to feel or a nose to smell or a mouth to taste. It just receives those impulses. And so our brain cannot tell the difference between, say, an actual lion standing right there in the path getting ready to charge at us, or our fear or our perceived idea that a lion is hiding around every corner waiting to pounce on us. So whether the threat is real or whether it just smells like or looks like something that happened before, our brain responds exactly the same way. It responds by mainly prompting our body to release this hormone called cortisol. A lot of people refer to that as the stress hormone. What that does is prepare us for action. We're getting ready to fight or flight because our brain can't tell. Is the threat actually right there, or do we just imagine that the threat is right there? But our bodies begin to respond the exact same way. And so what happens is that we tend to react. Instead of reflecting on something, instead of looking at that person and go, they kind of look like a Ziphite. That person kind of looks like a Fred. Instead of us going, yeah, but that's not a Ziphite and that's not Fred, instead of us reflecting on it, we just respond really quickly. It's a natural response, but unfortunately it's based on the fear that's there. So look at this psalm. David is still praying. When the psalm opens up, it's still, the first two verses tell us that David's praying. He says, "Listen to my prayer, O God. Do not ignore my plea. Hear me and answer me." So Psalm 54 was his prayer, and Psalm 55, he is still praying. But what I want you to see in the next three verses is all of this internal turmoil that's going on inside of David's heart. He says in verse number 2, "My thoughts trouble me." My thoughts trouble me. That phrase literally means my thoughts or my heart aren't tethered to anything. They aren't yoked to anything. And so I find myself constantly up and then down, up and then down. I'm just kind of blown around by, I see that person, I hear that person. It reminds me of something that happened before. And it's just a constant, when he says, "My thoughts trouble me," it's like, good guy, bad guy. No, is that a bad guy? No, it's not. I don't have anything to tether that to. My thoughts and my heart aren't yoked to anything. As a result, he says, "My thoughts trouble me and I am distraught." Oh man, this is a heavy word. This idea for distraught can mean one of two things. It really means so much busyness that you can't be bothered with anything else. And so this is either David saying, "God, I think you're so busy that you can't be bothered by what's going on with me." Like God is going, "David, come on, it's not a real threat. You just got to get over that." Or David is saying, "My thoughts are so bothered within me that I can't hear what God is saying to me." I think that second answer is much more likely. But I want you to hear where this same Hebrew word is used in a rather picturesque way. Elijah is battling the prophets of Baal. He's challenged them. He said, "You call to your God, you call to Baal, I'm going to call to Yahweh, and we're going to see which God answers us by sending down fire to consume the sacrifice that we've put on this altar." And so the prophets of Baal are over there and they are praying and they're dancing around. Some of them are even cutting themselves with knives and swords, thinking that the flow of blood might get their God's attention. And Elijah sort of mocks them a little bit. And I want you to listen to what he says in 1 Kings 18. At noon, Elijah began to taunt them. "Shout louder," he said. "Surely he's a god. Perhaps he is deep in thought or busy or traveling. Maybe he is sleeping and must be awakened." This phrase about being deep in thought, what he's really saying, it's the same word that David uses here for distraught. Elijah is saying that about this false god Baal. He's saying, you know what? He's got such big things on his mind. He's so absorbed in those things, he probably can't hear you. So you need to dance around a little bit more and shout a little bit louder to try to get his attention. What David's really saying here is, my thoughts have become so loud inside of me that, God, even if you were talking to me, I don't know that I could hear it because there's just so much turmoil, so much upheaval that's going on inside of me. Look what he says. So my thoughts trouble me and I'm distraught. And then look what he says that he's distraught at: the voice of the enemy and the stares of the wicked. It's almost like he looks over there and he sees a couple of people talking. He can't even hear what they're saying, but he's going, I bet they're talking about me. Or he sees somebody over here and he goes, oh, did you see that look that they gave me? Did you see that? Oh man, that was just a real kind of mocking look that they just gave me. There might have been absolutely nothing there. It's totally innocent what these people over here are talking about. This person maybe wasn't even looking at David. They were looking somewhere else. But David says, I got all this turmoil going on. So the voice of the enemy and the stares of the wicked, those things perplex me too, because I feel like I need to protect myself from getting attacked again. He says they bring down suffering upon me. Oh man, they just looking at them, just seeing that look that they gave me makes me suffer. And then he has this thing here, and these all kind of lead towards this idea of David almost feeling like he was drowning, like everything's closing in on him, an avalanche of things that are just coming down on him. He says, my heart is in anguish within me. The terrors of death assail me. Fear and trembling have beset me, and horror has overwhelmed me. Man, poor guy. I can feel for him. Sadly, I've been there, where you start looking, going, I don't want to get hurt again. And those people kind of look like they're kind of acting like the people that hurt me before. And you're like, I wonder what they're plotting. I wonder if they're talking about me over there. I wonder what's going to happen. I wonder if I need to watch my back to make sure that, and we're doing all this. And so now we've been looking at the Selahs in the Psalms. And what's very interesting is in this Psalm 55, David uses Selah twice, but both times it's in the middle of a sentence. Interesting. It's almost as if David is interrupting his own thoughts, which, as it turns out, I believe is exactly what he's doing. And I think it's something that we need to do as well. See, because David is just really listening to himself. He's not talking back to these anxious thoughts. And so we see this first Selah. Remember, I told you how our brain will stimulate the production of cortisol in our body, that stress hormone that prepares us for fight or flight. Well, you see it here with David. All of this, my thoughts are troubling me. I'm distraught. The voice of the enemy, the stares, the suffering, the anguish, the terror, the fear and trembling, the horror. All of those things are his body is getting ready for fight or flight. Or in David's case, it's mostly flight, because listen what he says then in verse 6. I said, oh, that I had the wings of a dove, and I would fly away and be at rest. I would flee far away and stay in the desert. Now, it's the middle of a sentence, but here's where he says Selah. And then he just goes on, I would hurry to my place of shelter, far from the tempest and the storm. So there's at least a momentary pause here. David's just been listening to all of these anxious thoughts that are making him go up and down and making him look at that person and wonder, what are they talking about and what are they looking at? And all of these things, it seems like it's closing in on me. He's just been listening. He hasn't been talking. And so now he says, I'm just going to run away. Selah. If I run away, I'll hurry to my place of shelter. I'll be far away from the tempest and the storm, but I'm also all by myself. So he's saying, I'm going to get away from all these people. That'll be the good news. I'm away from all these people. The bad news is I'm away from all these people. I'm all by myself in the desert. Is that preferable? And so I like in the Amplified version of the Bible, next to the word Selah, they always have this phrase that they put in parentheses that says, pause and calmly consider this. And so David, this first time, I don't know how long he pauses, but at least he has this momentary, like, maybe I should pause. I'd fly away, far away, stay in the desert. Selah, I would hurry to my place of refuge. You can see him just kind of blast right through that. He doesn't really pause very long, but at least he tries to interrupt his thoughts. Because then he just goes right back on. back to the wicked. God, confuse the wicked, confound their speech, because I see violence and strife, and day and night they prowl about on its walls. Malice and abuse are within it. Destructive forces are at work in the city. Threats and lies never leave the streets. He's still focused on those enemies. And again, what happens when that stress begins to build up, when that cortisol is just coursing through our bodies? One of the natural reactions for our body is to make us tunnel visioned. We stay singularly focused on the threat. Remember, the real threat or the perceived threat. We stay tunnel vision focused on it. Now, if we're tunnel visioned, what does that mean? It means I'm missing all kinds of details around somewhere else. I'm not taking in other information. It means that my ability to think and process creatively has really shrunk down because I'm so singularly focused on either the real or perceived threat. I'm not thinking creatively anymore. And so I just naturally react. There's no thought to it. It's just a reaction. So David is coming up to this second Selah, which is also in the middle of a sentence. In verse number 19, David says, God, who is enthroned forever, will hear them, talking about the evil people, and afflict them, Selah. This time, I think he pauses just a little bit more, because then he recognizes, as the sentence goes on, these are men who never change their ways. They have no fear of God. These are men that all of my watching, all of my, like, are they coming after me? Are they looking at me? Are they talking about me? Are they going to hurt me again? What is that going to give me? Because ultimately, they don't fear God. They don't regard God. They don't think God's going to hold them accountable for anything. So, am I going to be able to hold them accountable? If they really want to hurt me, am I going to be able to stop them? So, just like we said, that cliche kind of put the burden on us. Stab me in the back once, shame on you, but stab me in the back twice, shame on me. Is it really on me? You see, you can almost hear before this Selah, this pause and calmly consider that, you can almost feel David sort of tapping the brakes a little bit in just the two verses before this. There's a little word here that David says, but, hold on a second. I know all this is going on, but I call to the Lord and the Lord saves me. I call to the Lord and the Lord saves me. I don't have to watch my back. God's going to do that for me. Now, what does he say on the other side of this second Selah? These are men who never change their ways and have no fear of God. I'm not going to be able to stop them. They're not changing anything. But I don't have to stop them. I don't have to get them to change. But I call to God and the Lord saves me. And then we see this word but again in the last verse of this Psalm 55. In verse number 23, it's in here twice. But you, God, you're going to take care of this. You, O God, will bring down the wicked into the pit of corruption. Bloodthirsty and deceitful men will not live out half their days. Wait, hold on. I'm going to call on you. I'm going to keep my focus on you, not on these men that have no regard for you, that don't fear you. And God, you're going to be the one that's going to bring them down into a pit. And then I love this last phrase as David wraps up this psalm. But as for me, I trust in you. I'm not trusting in anybody else, and I don't have to look at anybody else. I just need to keep my eyes on you. When I was reading this, it reminded me of the prophet Jeremiah. Jeremiah has been referred to as the weeping prophet, primarily because after Judah gets sacked, after they get taken into captivity by the Babylonians, he writes a book called Lamentations, which is basically his weeping, his lament. And this book, this whole book of Lamentations, he has phrases in here like, my eyes fail from weeping. I'm crying so much I can't even see straight. My heart is in torment within me. And when we get to chapter 3, he starts off chapter 3 by saying, I'm a man who has seen affliction. I know what it is to see bad things happen. And he goes through all of this thing. And then he gets to verse number 19. He says, I remember my affliction and my wandering, the bitterness and the gall. I well remember them. And my soul is downcast within me. My soul is downcast within me. Doesn't that sound a lot like what David said in the beginning of this psalm about my thoughts trouble me, I'm distraught, I'm overcome with horror and fear and trembling. My soul is downcast within me. And just like David said, but, now here Jeremiah, same kind of word. He says, yet, this I will call to mind. I'm going to think about something else. Yet this I will call to mind, and therefore I have hope. What's he going to call to mind? Because of the Lord's great love, we are not consumed, for his compassions never fail. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. I say to myself, the Lord is my portion. Therefore, I will wait for him. Listen to what Jeremiah said. I say to myself. See, friends, we have to learn, just like David put these selahs in here in the middle of a sentence, he was attempting to interrupt those negative, anxious, fearful, overwhelming thoughts. But he was just listening to them. He wasn't talking back to them. Jeremiah was doing the same thing. And then he said, yet, hold on a second. This is what I'm going to say to myself. God's in control of this. God gets the last word on this. Not these guys around here that are maybe whispering about me, maybe plotting, maybe they look like Ziphites, maybe they smell like Fred. Not those guys. They don't get the last word. So here's what I'm going to tell myself. I'm going to stop listening to these negative thoughts. I'm going to interrupt those thoughts. I'm going to selah those thoughts. And I'm going to start talking to myself. And you know what? When we do that, friends, selah means this idea of reflection, where that reflection allows us to go from merely reacting out of our fear, out of our tunnel vision, to responding in a way that is more honoring of God and more physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually healthy for us. The way that David was living here was not a healthy way to live. It wasn't healthy for his emotional life, and I can promise you it wasn't going to be healthy for his physical life either. Cortisol in our body, that stress hormone, it's a good thing when we really have to respond to a threat. It sends all kind of blood flowing through big muscles so we can respond, we can run away, or we can fight as we need to. But if the threat, the real threat is gone, and we keep the perceived threat going on, and that cortisol continues to soar all through our body, our heart rate stays elevated, our blood pressure stays up, our body has a harder time processing food, and so we end up with things like indigestion. We become tunnel vision, so our creativity gets shrunk down. We need to interrupt those negative thoughts by talking to ourselves. What do we say when we talk to ourselves? Well, here's this, David says, but I called to God and the Lord saves. I think that's one of the things that we need to talk to ourselves about. We need to say, if I stick with this thought that I'm on right now, if I continue to think this way about that person or this person over here, if I continue to put my attention on them, where's that going to ultimately take me? What's that going to do for me physically, emotionally, spiritually, what's that going to do for me? I also need to pause. I need to interrupt my negative, anxious thoughts. And I need to say, hasn't God delivered me before? Just like David said here, but I call to God and the Lord saves me. Or when he says, but you, O God, you will bring them down. You're going to take care of the wicked. See, it's both. It's David looking back saying, God has delivered me in the past, and the Lord has heard me now, and he's saving me now, and he will save me in the future, and he will take care of the wicked. And so I think interrupting our negative thoughts to say, hold on a second, what has God done for me before? Because he's the same God today as he was yesterday, as he will be tomorrow. I think we can also, Selah, we can pause and calmly consider what does it say in God's word right now that he's going to do? What promises can I look at now in here? And I think one of the most helpful thoughts for me when I've interrupted my negative, anxious thoughts is to ask this question of myself. Could I imagine Jesus reacting the way that I'm reacting right now? Think about that one. Could I see Jesus going, look at them, oh, look at them, and reacting to that the way that I'm reacting right now? And if not, if I can't see Jesus doing that, then I can ask the Holy Spirit to show me what changes I need to make. And so David, as he says, I call to God and the Lord saves me. And in verse 17, he's going to continue to do this. Evening, morning, and noon, I cry out in distress, and he hears my voice. He ransoms me unharmed from the battle waged against me, even though many oppose me. Even though they're coming against me, I can call out, God's going to take care of this. But David had to Selah, he had to interrupt these negative, anxious thoughts. And it's what we're still called on today as New Testament Christians. Remember I told you back here when David said, my thoughts trouble me, how that was a picture of a heart or a mind that wasn't tethered or yoked to anything. There was nothing holding it in place. And so his thoughts and his emotions were up and down and up and down and up and down, because they weren't yoked, they weren't tethered. Listen to what Jesus said in Matthew 11. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened. Sounds like David, where he said he was distraught over all this. And I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. We need to be tethered to something. We need to be yoked to something so that our thoughts aren't up and down and our emotions aren't all over the place. And then we start in this spiral like David did because of the anxious thoughts that are playing on us. So choose to be tethered, choose to be yoked to Jesus, because he invites us to do that. Now, Peter, one of Jesus's disciples, who not only would have heard Jesus say this, but also would have read this, especially in Psalm 55. Listen to what verse 22 says. I want to read this for you and then read for you what Peter wrote in his first letter. David said this, cast your cares on the Lord, and he will sustain you. He will never let the righteous fall. Peter recognizes that there is a humbling that needs to take place in order to do that. Remember that cliche we told you about? Where he said, well, stab me in the back once, oh, that's a shame on you. But stab me in the back twice, that's shame on me. And so we it's a sense of pride in myself, like I can stop this. I can spot the threat coming and I can counteract it before it happens. I can do all of this. And we can't. And so in order for us to cast all of these cares on God requires a humility on our part, which Peter captures. Listen to what he wrote in 1 Peter 5. Humble yourselves, therefore, under God's mighty hand, that he may lift you up in due time. And then here, this sounds just like what David said in Psalm 55, verse 22. Cast all your anxiety on him because he cares for you. He cares for you. And then one more verse. Listen to what Paul writes about getting rid of our anxious thoughts, handing them over, casting them onto God. But then listen to what he says that the Lord will do for us in return. Philippians 4, do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God, and the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and mind in Christ Jesus. But as for me, David said, I trust in you. Friends, I encourage you, spot those anxious thoughts and interrupt them. My hunch is, if you're anything like me, you've just let those anxious thoughts talk to you. You've just been listening to them, and you've just been reacting to them out of fear because you've been tunnel visioned on it and you haven't seen the bigger picture. So interrupt them. Selah. Pause. Reflect. Where's this thought going to take me? How has God delivered me before? What is in his word that I can stand upon? What information haven't I considered yet? How am I trying to do it myself instead of humbling myself or being yoked with Jesus? Maybe asking that question, could I see Jesus reacting the way that I'm reacting? And in that time of interrupting those negative thoughts, in that time of questioning those thoughts and talking back to them, when you can selah, when you can reflect, I think what you'll find on the other side of that is that you've gone from reaction out of fear to responding out of trust, out of security, out of confidence that God is with you. But as for me, God, I trust in you. Lord, I pray for my friends that have been hurt, and they truly are living that out. Once bitten, twice shy. They've been hurt. They maybe even forgave the person that hurt them, that stabbed them in the back, but now they keep looking for that threat again. Would you help them to selah? Would you help them to reflect, not to react out of fear, but to cast all their cares on you, to be yoked to you, Jesus, to humble themselves under your mighty hand, to look at those negative thoughts in a new light, and then be able to respond in a way that glorifies you and in a way that sets them free. Help my friends to be able to interrupt those negative, anxious thoughts. In Jesus' name I ask. Amen. God bless you, friends. Interrupt those negative thoughts. Reflect, and then respond differently. God bless you. I love you.